Okay, so welcome to part 2 of how to make a casement window. We're in the workshop now and we're going to look at taking the raw material that's turned up that we've ordered and working out what we're going to use each piece for, cutting it up and planing it to usable timber. So we're going to start with the frame. I usually make these frames and plane the frame timber up first, and then make the frames and then come back and plane the casement timber up separately. But it's nice when you've got a limited amount of timber to work out where everything's going to come from in the wood before you actually make a start and cut anything up. Especially when you've got quality materials like prime oak, where a piece of wood like this is about 100 quid. So you don't want to be cutting it up and making any mistakes with it. You want to be really careful with what you're doing and make sure you use it in the best possible way. So if you can save a little bit of it for another project, then it's an absolute bonus. Especially if you've ordered it on a price order, so you've had a quote and they've sent the materials. If you can get extra material out of that stuff that they send, then that is a bit of a bonus, Brucey bonus. So this is the oak that's turned up. I said before about sizes of timber that might turn up. You've just got to check each piece and see what you've got to work with. So look over it, check for any stones that are visible that are going to damage your planer blades, remove any staples or pins that have been used to attach bits of paper in the kiln drying process and delivery process, because they are the little gits for attacking your planer blades with little chips. And I always cut the paint off the end, if nothing else, just a couple of mil, just to get rid of that paint, because that could probably damage your blades a little bit as well, and any sand or anything that's blown about while the timber's been drying for however long, it's just going to nestle in that end grain and again attack your planer blades. So yeah, just chop them off before you start. But take each piece and check it over. So this piece, for example, visually I can see it looks slightly thinner than I would expect, so it's actually finishing there about 62 mil. So we'll take a look down the length of it. Yeah, just cast an eye down it, and it's fairly straight, so we should get away with finishing that to our 58 mil. But we'll just have to play it by ear, see how we get on with that, and be really careful with our planing process that we're not wasting any passes when we plane that particular piece up. So that's something worth noting. So you could perhaps write a note on each piece on that one when you cut it up. Careful planing or something like that to make sure that you just take the depth off the planer as you straighten it up and don't go too mad with it. This piece looks alright in the thickness. It's the polar opposite of the last one. It's actually 67 mil thick, but it's struggling a bit towards this end in width. So until we get to about here, it's tapering off. So it's 200 mil at the line there, but it's tapering off to about 195 at this end. So if I'm looking to get 200 mils out of this piece, I'm going to struggle. So I've got to perhaps use that piece for one rip of it as being for the frame, and then the other section can be used for casement material and beading. So it's not a problem so much, but it's something to be looking at, to take into account. If a piece of timber's tapered, so if it was 205 this end and 195 the other end, or say it's go a bit more extreme than that, say it's 220 at this end and 200 at the other end, and you wanted 2 frame sections out of this one piece of timber, don't rip it down tight to what the narrow end is, so in the middle at 100 mil to the centre of your blade. What I would do is sort of taper the rip cut as you do it. So I'd rip it down so that it was wider at one end than the other on both pieces when you finished cutting it down. The reason it's a bit difficult to do that on a rip saw, you've got to sort of almost eyeball it or put a line on there and rip it to the line. But what that will allow you to do then is straighten up the piece of timber using the thicker end of the wood on the planer, and not touch the thin end, and then just do one pass through the thin end to get a finish on that end. So you're not going to be ripping it down tight to the almost your finished size all the way through, and then have to try and straighten the piece of timber, because you'll end up with that wood not holding up to size. So it's a good little trick if you have got a slight taper in your wood to work just the one end to get it straight when you're planing, and then finish it to size like that. But let's have a look at our cutting this. So we've got frame materials here, and then casement. So in terms of length, we've got a 1270 as our longest section, and these are 2.6 timbers. Just be careful with the ends of the timbers, have a good check, perhaps remove the paint and you can see the imperfections, but you could probably make out on the camera here there's a nasty split. So I'm just going to scribble that on there with a pencil, and you know, sort of if you've got the length in the timber, you can cut from that point to your measurement rather than sort of cutting it tight and ending up with an imperfection. So 1270, let's mark him out from that end of that split, just there. Okay, so that's 1270. So that'll be one frame section, so head or sill, and then we should have 1270 left this end. So that's going to be tight to one end out of that 2.6, 1270, and then we've got another 1270. That end's quite good, there's no imperfections there, so we'll be losing this split here by cutting the majority of the material off on that section. So I might want to, if I've got different widths left for the other side of this timber, I'll look to rip it down before I cut it to length. So if I've got 4 pieces at 1270, I'd cross cut it first, it's easier to handle, then do the rips afterwards. But since I've got different lengths to go off the other side of it, I'm going to need to rip it down first. Now, a good way, if you're sort of scratching your head wondering what the best way to tessellate your timber is to get the most out of the wood that you've got, there's an app called, I think there's quite a few different apps, but there's one called Cut List Optimizer that I sometimes use. It's designed predominantly for sheet materials, but it works with timber if you just input the size of your timbers, so the width, length, and you can add a thickness dimension as well, but it's not really necessary. If you input all the timber that you've got, so the stuff you've received from the manufacturer, and then your accurate cutting list and the kerf thickness of your blade, and press calculate, it will do all the calculations and work out where to cut each piece from what you've actually inputted into the machine. So if you number each piece of wood to 1 to whatever, and when you're inputting them into the app, make sure you add them numbers in, you know which piece to cut and what pieces you're going to be getting from it. It's quite a handy app for bigger orders, or if you're just not sure. I use it quite a lot for cabinet making, so the plywood, you end up with loads of pieces, but you can cut them all from the start and be really efficient with your materials. So it's bloody handy bit of kit, that is. But for a small single window like this, it's quite easy to work it out yourself. So the other half of this piece of timber is going to be casement material. So we're looking at 1 metre sections for the stiles, and then I've got 600mm sections for the rails as well. So 2.6 metre long timber, I can get 2 100mm sections and 1 600mm out as well. Okay, so this piece has got my 1 frame section and my casement sections, so 2 uprights and a rail. So on my cutting list I can cross them off, so 1270s I've got 2 of, so I can tick that off. 1005s, I now need 2 of them instead of 4, and a 600 I need 3 instead of 4 because I've got 1 in here. So looking at our next piece of timber, we know this is going to potentially struggle for thickness. It won't be too bad on casement material because it's only 58mm and not particularly long in this case at 1 metre, so it should be fine for that. And then the frame material, we've got the 1 metre sections, so that again they're not the taller ones. The 1270 sill and head are longer, so you're going to struggle more to get your thickness on a longer piece of wood than a shorter one. So we've used the shortest sections and we'll get the frame material out from there. So 1 metre 55, we'll get 2 of them out of the length of that timber. Just check the end there. So I'll knock 20mm off the end. Mark it. Check that we're going to get the rest of it off the end, which we obviously are. Mark it. And then just write on there, jam. So we know what we're doing with it. Now from that piece, we'll get 2 jams, and we've got a leftover section as well. Due to the fact that I've got a spare piece here, I'm going to get the other frame section out of that, as these are quite tight in their width. So I mean, it's only 205mm. Actually no, I've changed my mind. I'll get the 2 frame sections out of that because with the bandsaw I can get a 100mm finish. But I've got the option there of using that for a frame as well. So I've got plenty of timber. But I'll cut this, I can cut that across there full width at 1 section because I'm getting 2 of the same length pieces out of it. So that'll make it easier to rip down and easier to plane up too. So that'll give me my 3 1055 frame pieces, so they will be done. And that's everything I need for my frame. So on this job I'm going to stop there and cut and plane my frame material up. But in terms of the whole job, you can carry on. So we need 2 more casement uprights, so stiles. They're 1 metre and 55, so we'll get 1 out of this. No, 1 metre and 5, sorry. 1 out of there. And then we've only got 500mm left on the end, so we won't get a casement out the end of that. Let's see how it will work out if we use this section. 1 metre and 5, so 50, 60, 60. We will actually be able to get 2 casement sections out of that 1 piece if it's ripped down the middle. So instead of using that big piece of timber there to just get 1 stile out of, because I need 2 at 1 metre and 5, I will use this piece here with a 20mm offcut off the end and rip it down the middle. I'll make the 2 stiles out of that. Then I need 3 600mm rails, so we need 1800 in total. We'll get 2 out of 1 of these sections, depending on what we use. So we could use the section off of this piece as a bottom rail because it's full width, 95mm, the offcut we've got. We could use the piece I've got here that's just over 5 inches for 2 top rails, so that will rip down the middle, so I only need a 600mm length there. So rail, line, rail. And then all I need, I can use the offcut from this piece here because it'll already be the 4-inch rip, and that will be offcut, cut off at 600mm, and that will be a bot rail. Okay, so that's the bottom rail. So I should end up with a decent offcut of this piece of timber here and a fairly decent offcut of 2.5 by 4 off of this bit here, and I've got everything I need to make the window except the subsill. Like I said, the app Cut List Optimizer will sort all that out for you. Just remember to number each piece of wood as you put it in and put the corresponding number in the app. The only thing the app won't tell you is any imperfections in the timber. So if there's a big knot here in this piece of wood and you've got a 1200mm piece of timber running through it, the app won't sort of interpret that and help you with that. So if you're doing it manually, you can put a 600mm rail there and then cut the knot out instead of having the gap at one end. So just bear in mind, oak's more difficult to work with. It is a natural material and it's got imperfections and splits, and sometimes it doesn't hold up in thickness and size. So just checking each piece and being careful with your planing and your sort of setting out can really help you produce something nice as opposed to something that's full of flaws. Okay, so we'll do the first rip off this to get that frame section out. 95mm finish, so depending on how straight your timber's looking, you want to be at least 5mm more than that, so 100mm finish on your rip. If it's looking like a bit of a banana or something like that, you're going to have to rip the appropriate amount off to suit so that you can plane it straight. Sometimes planing one edge straight before you rip it down can help, but generally if it's already bent when you rip it again, the tensions in the timber that are already there will sort of remove and you're going to end up with another bent piece of timber. So you just got to sort of, it's a bit of a guesswork really as to how much extra you're going to add on to make that timber hold up to your planed finished size. So this looks fairly straight, looks like a nice bit of wood. I'm gonna rip it down at about 102mm to get my 95mm finish. I'm only going to rip the frame sections that I need. Some of this is for casement material, but I'll just rip the frame section I need so that if one piece doesn't hold up, I've got material left to replace that with to make another frame section that doesn't hold up. I can then use the frame section that's not made that size for a casement piece, whereas if I rip everything down to the sizes that I roughly need, X sizes before I plane it, I've got no scope for replacing a frame section if something goes wrong. So 102mm. I'm cutting one end of the timber off square here to remove that painted end to the raw material, just to remove any imperfections and grit that might be lodged in there that might affect the planer blades. Then I'm cutting it off to length, so it's the width of the window plus 20mm. Once you've made that cut, just have a look at the end grain section or the cross section of the cut that you've done, check for any shakes or imperfections in the timber that you couldn't see from the surface, and then make the following cuts relative to that. So if there was a problem, try and cut it out if you've got any spare length left in the timber. Okay, so from that one piece of wood, I've got my head and my sill sat here, pre-prepared, ready for planing, and I've just placed the offcut over there from the rip to get the casement material from, and because that piece was tapered, one end of it will make a spare frame piece if I need it, if one of these doesn't hold up after I've ripped it down. So I'll take the next piece and do the same process with that. Okay, so from the two wider pieces of timber, I've got some offcuts for the casements, which I've already assigned what they're going to be, but I've not written them down, just in case I need to use that timber for a frame piece. I've got my 3 uprights cut to length, 2 cross pieces, a head and a sill. I've not assigned which one it's going to be yet, and also got an offcut here of 500mm, so it's not wide enough to make a rail from. But you're going to want a couple of these for the job, just as test pieces and setting up pieces for the different joints in the window. If you're not used to doing this type of jointing or making windows, etc., I'd get at least 4 or 5 of these pieces out, just like this, so the same section size as what we're making. They can be in softwood or any material you've got kicking around, as long as you can get them to that 95mm thick finish. This thickness here, so the 58mm thickness finish, isn't so critical. In fact, I'll probably rip this in half, so I've got 4 setup pieces out of this one piece. But you're going to want some setup bits at 95mm width, by at least sort of 300, something a workable length that you can push through the spindle moulder that's not dangerous. Okay, so we move on to planing the timber up. Before we start with the planing, just prep your planer. Make sure the beds are nice and clean. There's no rust or residues or anything, glues, timber, etc. on the actual beds. So they're nice and smooth. Then we'll put a machine wax on the actual beds themselves. It'll just help you pushing the timber over. You're not having to put too much pressure on the wood to physically get it over the planer. What that helps us to achieve is nice flat timber. So if you've only got to apply a light downward pressure to the timber to push it through the machine, it can sort of find its own level as it goes through and stay flat. Whereas if you're having to exert a lot of pressure to physically push the wood through, if there's a cup in the timber, as you get towards the end of the bit of wood, all that pressure is just going to lift the timber into that cup, and you're not going to be planing it away. So nice and smooth beds with machine wax or whatever form of lubrication you want, but the smoother it is to push that window over, or the wood over, the better. And also you want to check your fences nice and square, so just put a machine engineer square on the bed and check it against the fence, then plane a piece of timber and also check the piece of timber after you've planed it as well. So sometimes you can see a discrepancy in bed to fence against blade to fence or whatever, but just check the material that's coming off the machine is perfectly square, because it will help you all the way through the process. We also want to just turn the machine off and check the blades over as well, especially with oak. It's not very forgiving on the outfeed side, so if you've got dull blades and it's hard wood, it's just going to ride up on the blades and not do a proper cut, and you're not going to get nice flat timber. And equally, if there's any chips in the blades, them chips leave an uncut piece of material, which again, when it reaches the back fence, will ride up and actually lift the timber away from the blades as it comes into to meet it. So again, you're not going to get straight timber, or you're going to get twisted timber. So it's good practice to just check the blades before you start on oak, or do a test cut and have a look, see what you finish you're getting. There's a little trick: if you've got 1 or 2 nicks in the blades, you can just undo the blades and just move 1 left and 1 right, and that will help to remove that chip. Because if you've got 3 or 4 blades in a cutter block and the chips gone through all of them, just moving them left and right will have at least 1 blade covering where that chip cut was. Okay, so before I turn it on, just run through the process and then we can see it in action. So getting straight and square timber is really sort of important for accurate windows, accurate joints, and just an overall good finish. So it all starts from this point here. When you start planing any timber, you want to just have a quick look at it first, see which way it's bowed. So if it's twisted, you'll probably see a bow in both directions, but you're looking for the point at which it is mostly in a C-shaped curve. So you're putting the tips of the C down onto the bed. So if this piece of timber was bowed in this direction here, like this, you'd put this side down onto the bed and you'd plane it so the ends cut first, so you'd leave a hollow in the middle. Same time as you sort of planing that C-shaped curve, if there is a twist in the timber, you're just letting the timber be free almost as it goes on. Light pressure, you'll be able to feel where there's a twist and just let it sit on them points. Don't force it down to catch the timber, you're just letting it sit. Light pressure and let the planer cut into the start of the timber. As you work your way along, you're keeping the pressure on the point at which it's cut. So if it was cutting on this far corner here, nearest the fence, once it's actually physically cut it and it's made it onto that back bed, that's your pressure point for the rest of the planing. And then this hand, your right hand, or whichever way around your planer is just feeding the material in, it's just keeping an even downward pressure on the front of the timber. And you should feel or see which way that timber is twisted. So if it did have a twist, this side of the timber then would be the point at which the pressure was being applied to. Be like this as you're planing and keeping it nice and flat. Just finish the cut through like that. You can have a planing aid like a push block, which will keep your hand away from the blades if you wish. I've never seen it as an issue too much, but they are quite a good safety device. Some people will have the planer guard set up like this. So they'll lift this crown guard and push it all the way to the fence, or push it so far that they can edge it as well. I don't like that personally. I think that's more unsafe than having it down flat on the bed, because when there's no timber there at all, you can see the whole blade, and if you happen to fall onto the planer or trip or something, you could put your whole hand in there, rather than if it was flat on the deck like that. You've only got the width of the timber that you're planing that's accessible, but it's up to you sort of what you deem as to be safe for your purposes. I'm not going to tell you what and what not to do in terms of safety. There are sort of safety books and regulations out there, I'm sure, but I was always trained whenever you're pushing anything through to have that guard protecting the bed completely there, so it's down near the bed as it will go and up to the edge of the timber. And then when you change to do the edge like that, again you can just quickly push it up to the timber, and you don't see any blades at all when you're planing, and you just keep your hands away from it whenever the blade is exposed. Like I say, not a safety lesson, but just remember to keep a good practice and don't put your hands anywhere near the blades. Definitely don't, sort of when you're edging it, get your hands anywhere near running along the bed like that, because you'll just plane the tips off your fingers. Or equally, if you got stiff, like a residue built up on your bed, so it's quite hard to push the material through, you'd be tempted to have your hand behind the wood, and that's a bit of a no-no too, because it's quite easy to just push through and again plane the ends of your fingers or something off, or the bottom of your hand. So quite a dangerous tool, you see a lot of accidents on them, so just be really, really careful with a planer. So like I was saying, C-shape down. For the first cut, you want just a light cut, about 1/2 mil, and just let it sort of nibble away and see where it's going to take the material off. When you turn it upside down, you can see the points at which it's cut, and then they're your reference points for the next pass to put the pressure on. And then you're just going to plane away until you've got a clean cut all the way through the material and a nice flat face. Keep the speed nice and slow. If you want the same finish as you're going to get from thickness in, you've got to go a similar speed to what it will go through the thicknesser at, so that's pretty steady. Generally I'll plane it up a bit quicker and then run both sides through the thicknesser so you've got a consistent finish. Once you've planed the face, we'll turn the timber on its edge. Again, we can use that planed face to just look down both sides of the wood and identify which way the C-shaped curve is. And this is slightly easier to plane once you've got one flat face. You sit that flat face against the fence, C-shape down, and we're going to do exactly the same thing, but instead of this time having to worry about it twisting and taking the twist out, we've already got a flat face to reference against the fence. All we're doing is straightening up that edge using that square edge on the fence. So once you've got the one reference face, it's pretty easy to get a nice flat finish on the edge. Again, just take small amounts off until that timber is nice and flat. You just want to keep a ruler or a tape measure nearby or in your pocket and reference each end. Make sure your timber is holding up in size for what you need. So if we're looking at 58mm thickness and I've only got 61mm thickness on this piece to start with, I've just got to be really careful. Check both ends. If I've still not got it straight and we're getting near at this end, you might have a bit more material at the far end. Turn it round and take another pass just off that end to try and get it straight without running out of material. Okay, so on the thickness of the same principle applies. Machine wax on the beds, nice clean beds, no resin. You don't want the machine to be struggling to pull the material through, because as soon as the timber stops going through the thicknesser, you end up with a like a divot or a planar ripple in the surface. So, or a burn mark or something like that, where the blades are spinning in the same spot and they're not quite sharp. You'll end up with a burn mark across the timber, which is just not nice, and with oak it's quite difficult to get rid of it, so you've got to remove quite a bit of timber to physically get rid of that burn mark. So you want to keep everything nice and lubricated. As soon as one piece of material stops going through, so it's got some friction in there that's preventing it from being pulled through, just stop what you're doing and put some more lubrication on. Don't be lazy with it. There's also a couple of spring plates in the top of my planer that run on the timber too, that help with the dust extraction and also put pressure down to keep it against the bed as well as the rollers. And I just run a bit of the wax along them too, avoiding getting the wax on the rollers so that they slip. So just a bit on them pressure plates will help glide the timber through too. So looking for a 95mm finish, I normally finish the wider measurement first. So a 58 by 95, I'll always finish the 95 thickness first. More so on thinner boards. So if you're planing something that's like an inch by 6, you don't want to plane the inch down to 20mm, then thickness the width, because you've got less surface for it to run on the bed and more chance for it to go out of square. So usually plane that wider surface thickness first. I've ripped these down to 102, got a 95 finish, so I'm going to go with my first pass somewhere that I know every piece will definitely go through. So this machine will cut 5mm off in one go, so it's going to be anywhere from 97 to 102 with my first pass. So I think I'm going to call it about 98mm. Gives me plenty of scope to then take 2 more cuts off if I want to plane the other edge instead of just plane it all off one surface. So I'm going to set that to 98 and then run all the pieces through. As I thickness the timber, I tend to bias the location of where I push it through the thicknesser towards the back of the machine. As you look at it now, it gives you a bit better wear across the blade, so it's more even blade use. You tend to do the planing nearer your body on this near side of the machine, and then the back of the blades don't get worn down as much. So it's just a way of utilising all the life out of the blades and make sure that they wear evenly. Right, so with that first pass, I'll always take them out of the machine and leave them in the same orientation as they come out the thicknesser. So that side is left up, and you can have a look at the material that's been taken away. So you can do this as they're coming out of the machine if you're sort of quick enough, but you can have a quick look at the surface and just pencil in any imperfection that you happen to see. It's important to do this when you're nearing final thickness, because sometimes you can see like a tiny shake in the edge of a piece of timber that when you come to setting out you might miss, because you're looking at quite a lot of wood in a short period of time. You can sort of go a bit blind to it. So if you just see something like here on the edge of that material, there's a missed bit where it's been dented by something, just put some lines on it or near it. Same there, got an imperfection, so just mark them, and you're not going to miss them then when you come to setting out. So like I said, you can do this as they come out of the machine, especially if you're planing them one piece at a time and you're waiting for them to come out. You can just tick the imperfections as you see them. And just sort of do this every time, because I can now look at these pieces and think, if they were all perfect and there was no imperfections, I could turn them over and thickness the other side to the finished thickness if my planer would leave a nice finish doing that. Because we've got some imperfections still, I'm going to run the ones that have got parts wrong with them down to about 95.5mm, because the side that I've planed should be pretty good and imperfection free. I can take these sides to as much as they will give before final thickness, and then turn it over for that last 0.5mm and just take out the planer ripples from my hand planing, which will be slightly wider. You can see there you've got a more rippled surface than I've got there that's been thicknessed. So where there's an imperfection, I'm going to just thickness that away until it's disappeared, and then use that last 0.5mm to get a really nice finish on both sides of the piece of timber. I wouldn't get too fussy about imperfections at this stage. Something like that, where you've got a knot on an edge of a piece of timber, we can hide that in the orientation so it's hidden by the plasterboard, or take it out in a rebate. So there's lots we can do beyond this stage to get the imperfections, so don't spend hours looking through each piece. It's just a quick reference so that you can sort of help the quality of the job along by orientating that planing. We're lucky here using oak, because it gives a nice finish even if you take 2.5, 3mm off at the thicknessing stage. It still gives a nice finish, like chip free. Something like a coir, I tend to find if I'm finishing it at 95mm, I'll have to finish it to 96mm in my sort of big thicknessing amount. So say from 100mm to 96mm give me the square timber, and then I'll take 2 passes off at 0.5mm, one off of each face, and I tend to get a really nice chip free finish. The coir tends to get like a chip bruising effect from the blades. I'm not really sure why. I think it's just the nature of the timber, and it's quite dry. You tend to see it on dry pines and anything like that. This chip bruising. So yeah, just a ½ mil sliver off of the end of the planing of both faces leaves us sort of a perfect finish, like a smooth finish. But with oak, probably not going to have to do that. Okay, so it's the same process for thicknessing in the other direction. We're looking for that 58mm thickness finish. Because we've not ripped them down in this direction, they're going to vary from piece to piece. So it's best to just stick a tape over the majority of them, get an idea for what sort of thicknesses we're working with. So one piece was 67mm and one was about 62. So they're just slightly under 60mm after planing. These are about 65mm. So if I go in at 63mm, it should clean all these up of the high points. Then I can go to 60 or 59 and then to my 58 finish. It might seem like a faff pushing them through that extra pass to get that clean finish, but you'll really thank me later when you come to sanding the pieces of timber. The planer ripples that the thickness of leaves are so minor that it makes it a really easy job, as opposed to the hand planed finish. If you push them through a bit quick, you get a really deep ripple effect, and it's quite hard to physically sand that out, especially if you're doing it by hand along the finer edges. Another thing worth noting while you're planing up, just pay attention to, as it's going through the thicknesser, how the finish is being left by the blade. So this isn't a particularly bad piece of wood, it's just showing a cross grain here, but it's not actually the grain of the timber too bad in that direction, it's just how it's been cut. But sometimes the grain will run out through the edge of the timber that you're planing. So if you put that in the thicknesser the wrong way round, it's working against the blades and will actually create like a chipped effect in the surface finish of the timber. So you want to just turn that piece of timber around so that it cuts cuts with the grain as it's coming out the timber, so that it has a nicer finish, like more of a shearing effect on that grain of the wood. So just pay attention to each piece. That's why it's important as they come out to put them back as they've come out the machine. You can see which ones are leaving a rough finish and then turn them around for the next pass. So we have it, nice square planed timber, ready to start making the window.